from the cell phone.
Okay. Is that?
That's correct.
So has that exhibit been created?
It's being produced as we speak. It's printed in color. We have to email it over to the public defender's office, and somebody's running it up Church Street as we speak.
Right, so we can take that up tomorrow morning if it's not worth it.
Yeah, we can. I'll rest as long as I know it's coming in. I'm okay with that.
Okay. Does the state have any issues? Or?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, so
You might want to wait before 6 o'clock. She knows it.
Carrie knows it.
Been looking at her for a while.
All rise.
I think we're going to reserve witnesses with the state.
That's correct. The state will call Detective Cari Crick. Go ahead.
She shall give relative to the cause now under consideration shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth and contains. Please be seated. Please seat forward and speak in the microphone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
It's Cari Crick. Last name is spelled C-R-I-C-K.
And how are you employed?
With the Vermont State Police
And how long have you been with the Vermont State Police?
since 2007.
Would you please tell the ladies and gentlemen what your educational background is?
So I have a bachelor's degree in speech communication from Hastings College. It's in Nebraska. I also have a bachelor's degree in psychology with double endorsement in personality theories and health intervention. And I have a master's degree in forensic psychology from Castleton State College.
Would you tell us about your prior work experience with Vermont State Police, what you've done while you've been with them?
Sure. So I started my career on patrol. I was assigned to the Wilson Barracks. I was there for 4 years. From there, I actually became a detective trooper and went to what is now called the Vermont Intelligence Center. It was not that when I was there, except for the latter part. I was there for 3.5 years. During that point in time, I was doing analytical work. From there, I went back to patrol. I was assigned to the New Haven Barracks down in Addison County, and I was there for 2 years before I became a detective again, and I was assigned to the Washington County Special Investigation Unit, which specializes again in crimes against children. And from there, I then went into my current unit, which is the Technology Investigation Unit, and I was recently promoted to sergeant within that unit. And I've been with this unit for about 1.5 years.
So in October of 2016, what were you doing?
I was assigned to the Special Investigation Unit.
Okay. I'd like to show you what we've marked as State's Exhibit 75 for identification and ask if you recognize it.
Yes.
And what is it, please?
This is my CV.
Your Honor, this time the State would move the CV into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
Admitted without objection.
Do you have any specialized training that's in connection with the work that you do?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
So I have been trained in mobile forensics. So that is your mobile devices, your cell phones, your tablets, anything that is mobile. And I've also been trained in call detail record analysis. My first training was back in 2012 when I was with the Intelligence Center, and I was trained in PenLink 8. And then in 2017, I was trained in PLX, which is also PenLink. It's the newer software. And then in 2018, I was trained in ZX, that Mr. Ray actually just spoke about. I'm also a member of the National Domestic Communicators Assistance Center, which has a biannual law enforcement technical forum conference. And at those conferences, there are representatives from all the different types of service providers, including our wireless service providers like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. And they will do presentations there, and it's a chance for us to interact with them and talk to them about the things that we see in their networks.
Your Honor, at this time the State would move Detective Crick as an expert in call detail record analysis.
Any objection?
No objection.
So the court will make that finding.
I'd like to take you back to October 8, 2016. Were you on duty on that date?
No.
Okay. Did you become involved in a crash investigation involving Stephen Bourgoin?
Yes.
And when was that, do you know?
It was sometime in the evening.
Of October 8th?
Yes.
Okay. And so what did you do in the investigation
So
itself?
I was off duty, and I got the call to come in to assist with the investigation. The on-call detective had asked for additional detectives to come in and help out with interviews and whatever needed to be done at that point in time. So I went to the Williston Barracks, and that's what initiated my involvement into this investigation.
And after that point, were you then asked to conduct a cell phone record analysis?
Yes,
Okay. And of whose phone?
Mr. Bourgoin's.
Okay. What's his phone number, please?
It's 802-558-0460.
And what company did the defendant use for his cell phone service?
It's a Verizon phone?
Were you able to obtain his cell phone records?
Yes.
From what date to what date, do you remember?
They began on September 8th of 2016, and then we got them through August 20th of 2018.
Okay. August 20th of 2018?
Yes.
All right. Why would you get them through August 20th of 2018?
So we actually did 2 search warrants. The initial one was done back in 2016. And at that point, our search warrant scope had only been from the the September 8th. I want to make sure, did I say that correctly the first time? September 8th of 2016 through October 10th of 2016. Throughout the investigation, there were some questions about some records that appeared after that the phone supposedly had terminated. And we wanted to try to understand if that phone was still connected to the network outside of that time frame that we had got the original warrant for. So we applied for a second warrant to include through, at the time, what was the current date, which would have been August 20th of 2018.
Okay. I'd like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 73 for identification and ask you if you recognize this.
Yes.
And what is that, please?
This is a letter of authentication from Verizon. It is from the custodian of records, and it certifies that the records that they provided us are true and accurate copies of the records that they had on file at the time that they obtained during their normal course of business.
Your Honor, we would move State's Exhibit 73 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
73 is admitted.
type of records or information does a company like Verizon keep on our cell phones?
Verizon keeps a lot of information, as do all the wireless providers. But I'm going to speak specifically about Verizon. As you heard Mr. Ray testify earlier that these companies keep these records in their normal course of business. They are a business. They are a for-profit business. They want to get the most customers that they can in order to have the most money. And they do that a couple of different ways. So they keep these records for a couple of different reasons. One being for the customer themselves. If you think about the last time you looked at your cell phone bill and you saw your call transactions, date, time, this is who you called, date, time, this is who called you, text messages, that type of stuff, your data sessions. These are all customer-intended documents that Verizon kept that information to give to you as the customer so that you know what your network activity is. It's especially important when you consider certain plans, you only can have so many text messages. And that's how they let you know, hey, you're getting kind of close. Or you can only use so much data. Hey, you're getting kind of close. You can see this on your bill. The other reason that they keep all of these records is for their own purposes. It's raw data. For them, it's a bunch of codes and everything that make perfect sense to them. And they use that to understand how their network is working. If somebody makes a phone call, what's the route that that phone call transaction goes through? Does it stay on the 3G network or the 4G network? These are different types of technologies that these phone companies have. You might have heard in the news that 5G is coming down the pipeline. It's just another type of technology. So these phone companies will use these records to understand their own network. And so what happens is that when a transaction occurs, I'm just going to say a Verizon text message, for example. It will go through Verizon's system, and there's several different parts on their system, on their network, that will capture different bits of information. Some of it will capture that mapping information, like what Mr. Ray was testifying to. Other parts will be the content of the message, if it's available. What did that text message actually say? On one report, it will have the transactional information. What was the date and time and the phone number that that transaction went through? And they will use all of this information to be able to understand how well is their network working, and is it working the best that it can so that people want to become customers because they know it's working well. They know that their 4G is really good in one area, but their 3G is not so great because phones keep on jumping over to 4G. So it's for their own purposes, but in Verizon, it comes in a multitude of reports. We can see anywhere between 15 to 16 different types of reports that will all have this raw data in them.
So you received from Verizon this raw data, and what did you do with that raw data?
So initially in 2016, I used the program Penlink 8. That was the program that the state police was using at that time. I loaded the reports that I was able to into that program, and then from there, it essentially takes what is that raw data and can be very confusing to look at, and it makes it more user-friendly and more easily read by somebody. And I generated some reports in turn back out of what I could. At that time, Penlink 8 could not actually process all of the reports that were available from Verizon. So my initial analysis back in 2016 was only a partial picture of what was actually available at that time. So through the course of the investigation, as it continued, I was asked to look at this information again, these records again, using our up-to-date software, which is PLX. That is the most up-to-date version right now. And that can actually ingest almost all of the records, and it gives us a much better picture of that activity that was occurring on that phone that was going through the Verizon network.
So based on the raw data that you received from Verizon, did you then create a report that contained incoming and outgoing voice calls as well as incoming and outgoing text messages?
Yes.
And I'd like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 76 for identification and ask you if you recognize this.
Yes.
Is that the report that you created using the raw data that you received from Verizon
Yes,
for incoming and outgoing voicemail and text, voice calls and text?
voice calls and texts.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will move the evidence, states exhibit 76.
Any objection?
No objection.
Admitted without objection.
So before we take a look at those actual records, what is the beginning date and the end, the beginning date and the ending date for those records? What do they cover?
These are from October 1st through October 7th of 2016.
And before we look at those actual records, did you review any other documents in connection with your analysis of the phone records in this case?
Yes.
What did you review?
I was given transcripts of Mr. Bourgoin's interviews, first with investigator Kylie, then with Dr. Rose Marin, and then the joint interview with Dr. Rose Marin and Dr. Lucas.
And why did you need to review those interviews?
Part of what I was looking at, especially with this second analysis with these records, is for statements that Mr. Bourgoin made that I may see some sort of evidence of, either corroborating or refuting evidence inside those records. So that second analysis was really intended for looking for specific statements that he had made that I might be able to find in his call detail records.
Did you actually create a timeline of the defendant's activities as you reported them to the interviewers?
Yes.
And you provided that to Mr. Ray for his mapping purposes as well?
Yes.
So let's take a look. So please explain what the columns are. Just go across and tell us what those are.
So we start on the left-hand side. That is the date. So that is the date that that particular transaction occurred. There is the time. That is in military time, as you can see, so it's on the 24-hour clock. The duration, it's the farthest point to the right is actually the seconds, and the minutes, and then hours as you're moving to the left. The direction is whether that particular transaction is incoming or outgoing. The call type is either a voice call or a text message. And I want to make a little bit of a distinction here. When it comes to the text messages, what I'm speaking about is text messages that actually use the Verizon network. There is the potential for a lot of chat communication that does not actually go through the Verizon network as a text message. It would show up in data. So the best example that I have for that is the iMessage on an iPhone would not actually show up in this particular report because that would be a data session in Verizon's records. So these are not necessarily all-inclusive of all activity that was occurring on the phone in regards to text messaging. Then you have your contact ID. That is the number that was being contacted by the device. The contact name. This is a list of the names associated with those contact IDs that were identified through the investigation. And then the furthest column on the right is the text message content. There's a couple things I want to point out in here. One being that from the right off you can see at the top there's a text message content that says like inbox update or some variation of that. That is found within the message content records. But those are like system administrator messages. That's not something that's necessarily seen on the device itself. That's a behind the scenes. Something else to point out with that same transaction is you'll see in the contact ID it says like -1.9 and then continues on. What that's actually in the records themselves, what that looks like is a code that when put into Penlink, that's how it appears in Excel, because Excel doesn't like weird numbers, so it does weird things unless you format them. So that's actually a code before that particular message. Verizon's network is set up where you can actually have copies of text messages sent and received copied to the cloud. So as I'm looking at these records anytime I see that particular code. That's actually in reference to a cloud transaction, and it's really nothing, again, that the user is going to see on their phone. It happens behind the scenes. So anytime you see that in the records, I can't take that out. I can't clean that up because of the way that the records are. But that is what that is. The only other thing to immediately point out is this is a very cleaned up version, because again, these programs that we use take that raw data, which is exhaustive and quite frankly annoying sometimes to look at, and it makes it user-friendly for us. But there's a couple of things that I have to do to get to this final point. One of which is I have to create filter files. So if you remember me talking about that 3G, 4G technology, Verizon has two separate reports for 3G voice calls and 4G voice calls. And on the 3G voice call report, we can actually see calls that start on the 3G network and bounce to the 4G network. So if I were to just create a report just from that, you would see what looks like a lot of duplicate calls, but they're not that way. It's because they show up on two different reports, because like I was saying earlier, when they capture this information, they do it all different places and different times and different ways. So before I get to this point, I actually will create filtered files, and I will get rid of as much information as I can that might lead to it looking like a duplicate record. When it comes to the text messages, I can't always do that. Because of the way that the text message records come, they're in PDF format, I can't actually change a PDF, so they will go in as well as the actual text message transactional information. So sometimes it can look like there's more than one text message in here, when it's really there's only one. I just could not clean that part up. But I cleaned up as much as I could to make it as user-friendly and as readable as possible when we're looking at this.
Thank you. So you said that the time is in military time, so if we see like 13:02:35, that's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you have the names of the contact people. How did you get that?
So a couple of different ways. Back in 2016, we did an initial, I created what's called a hot list, which is essentially a frequency count of the contact IDs, or those phone numbers that are contacted, and it just tells me how many times a certain contact ID was contacted. And through that hot list back in 2016, we took any time that there was a number, a contact ID that was contacted in these records 10 or more times. And when I say contacted, I'm referring to both incoming and outgoing calls. And then we tried to figure out what they were. We ran it through our intelligence center. We had interviews with witnesses that we were able to identify these numbers. I did open source searches, meaning I Googled it. That's an open source search. And if there were ones that I could not identify through any other mean, then I just straight up called them. And whatever I could get out of that number when I called it is what I went with to identify the number.
So we see that the very first call, and we're not going to go through every one of these calls over the 41 pages, but I do want to point out certain calls. The very first call is incoming from PayPal creditor. Did you determine who PayPal creditor is?
PayPal is a bank, and that was the creditor side of the bank.
Okay, and it says the duration is 3 seconds and it's incoming. What does that indicate to you? That phone call came in from that contact ID through the Verizon network, intended for the phone number, Mr. Bourgoin's phone number, and that it stayed on the network for only 3 seconds. So that could have been that he silenced it, or it could have been that it was terminated on the incoming side. I cannot determine if that phone call was actually answered or not. So does the PayPal creditor contact name come up several times in these 41 pages?
Yes.
Do you know how many times?
I do not.
Okay. How about the Capital One? What did you determine that was about?
So that is, again, Capital One Bank. It's a banking institution, a financial institution.
Okay. And does that again come up several times throughout these pages?
Yes.
And the third call is from an Asima Kosovic. Did you determine who that was?
Yes.
And who is she?
My understanding is that she is Alan Kosovic's. Alan is Mr. Bourgoin's best friend. It's his wife.
Okay. So does her name show up a lot of times in these records as well?
Yes, she was the most contacted person.
On 10/1 at 13:02, it looks like the defendant is texting with someone named James Barefoot about presidential candidates.
Yes,
Okay, do you know who James Barefoot is?
I do not.
Page 2, are these all either incoming or outgoing texts with Asima Kosovic?
Yes.
Page 3, are these all ingoing or outgoing texts with Asima other than the PayPal creditor at 1552.57?
Yes.
Page 4, text to and from Asima Kosovic, and then Elisa DiPaolo shows up at 21:35. Do you know who she is?
She is a friend of Mr. Bourgoin.
Same thing on page 5, either Asima or Lisa.
Yes, except for those system administrator messages.
Okay. And page 6, all Lisa DiPaolo.
Yes.
Page 7, all Lisa DiPaolo.
Yes.
And page 8, it's Lisa DiPaolo and Asima Kosovic along with Joseph Worth. Do you know who he is?
I do not.
In your review of the phone records with contact information between the defendant and others, did you ever come upon any text messages containing anything, any language that was of concern to you?
No.
That anything about his mental health?
No.
So now, page 9 and 10, we're on October 2nd, and he's still texting back and forth with Asima Kosovic?
Yes, and I'm sorry if I can interrupt. Is it possible to move this easel a little bit? I can't see half the screen. Thank you.
Okay. Page 10, Asima Kosovic, back and forth texting.
Yes.
Page 11, at 1:21:39, what does that text message say?
You are like me, a night owl, huh?
So, in your review of these records, were the texting back and forth between Asima Kosovic and the defendant, did they take place in the early morning hours?
Yes.
All right, so page 12, same thing, Asima Kosovic. 13, Asima Kosovic.
Yes.
14, Asima Kosovic.
Yes.
15, Asima Kosovic.
Yes.
16, Asima Kosovic.
Yes.
17, Asima Kosovic.
Yes.
18, way down the page, Asima Kosovic. And then there's more of those hieroglyphics that you were telling us you couldn't get rid of.
Correct.
Okay. Page 19, we're on October 2nd, and it looks like there are more calls coming in from PayPal creditor and Capital One.
Yes.
And the defendant at this point is now texting with Alan Kosovic, correct?
Correct.
And he's talking with Kevin Bourgoin. Do you know who Kevin Bourgoin is?
I believe his brother.
And now the defendant is texting with Karen Messer-Bourgoin. Do you know who she is?
I believe that's his mother.
Same thing on page 21.
Yes.
Page 22, we're now on October 3rd, and again, it's just texting between him and Asima Kosovic. And can you tell us, are these early morning hour texts that you were talking about?
Yes.
And then on page 23, they finally say goodnight at what time? Well, let me keep going. I think they're still talking about it. 24, more text with Asima Kosovic. 25, more text with Asima Kosovic. 26, there's more text with Asima Kosovic. And now, can you tell us at what time did they finally say goodnight to each other?
The last text message was an incoming from Asima at 2:32
In the morning?
in the morning.
Okay. And again, there's more of those hieroglyphics that you were telling us about.
Yes.
Page 27, he's texting with Alan Kosovic.
Yes.
And over the next few pages, he's either texting with Alan Kosovic or talking to various people.
Yes.
And again, we see PayPal creditor is calling. Capital One is calling.
Yes.
Again, texting with Joseph Worth.
Yes.
Okay, so we're now on October 4th. On this particular page, how many calls are coming in from either PayPal creditor or Capital One?
So there's 4 from the PayPal creditor that are incoming calls, and then 2 from Capital One that are incoming calls.
Okay. And at 13:21, which would be 1:21 in the afternoon, it says that there is an incoming call from Mortgage Service Center Collection. Do you know what that is?
So according to Google, that is actually the collection portion of PHH Mortgage, which I learned through my interview with Anila Lawrence is the mortgage company for their residents.
We're in, on page 33, more texting with Asima. 34, there are more calls coming in from PayPal creditor and Capital One.
Yes.
How many on that page alone?
There's 5 from PayPal creditor.
And we're now into October 5th. More texting. And again, there are more creditor calls.
Yes.
And we're now into October 6th. At 13:17, which was 1:17 in the afternoon, do you know what the default legal department is?
I do not. That was the best I could ascertain.
Okay. So on the morning of October 6th, starting at 9 in the morning, the first call he receives is from PayPal creditor, the second is from Capital One, and the third is from PayPal creditor?
Yes.
And then he has a 38-minute phone call with Josh Fisher, and this is all on the 6th of October?
Yes.
At 1:04 in the afternoon, no, I guess that's 1 o'clock, is that in the morning, 1:04 in the morning?
That would be in the morning.
Okay, there's a call to Tax 10,000. Do you know what Tax 10,000 is?
Yes.
What is that?
It's a tax relief company for people that owe more than $10,000 to the IRS.
Okay. And then we see the defendant is again texting Asima, and it's the early morning hours of October 7th.
Yes.
And they finally say goodnight to each other at what time on the 7th?
3 a.m.
At 8:48 on October 7th, there's a call from an unknown financial institution. Do you know who that is?
I do not.
Okay. Did you try to ascertain who that was?
I did. That was one of the ones that I was calling, and a gentleman answered the phone and refused to identify what company he worked for. We went round and round for a little bit before I was able to ascertain that he was at least working for a financial institution, but he would not tell me the name or what he would have been calling for.
And then the next call, that first thing that next morning, is from PayPal creditor, and then the unknown financial institution, and then 3 calls from PayPal creditor,
Yes.
and then the unknown financial institution again, twice, 2 more times,
Yes.
and then the PayPal creditor.
Yes.
Did you add up how many calls he got from creditors on October 7th?
I did.
And how many was that?
That particular day, it was at least 8.
At 16:02, which is 4:02 in the afternoon on October 7th, there's a call coming in from Lake Champlain Chocolates. Based on your review of the interviews that the defendant gave to several different people, were you made aware that he had told the interviewers that he called Lake Champlain Chocolates to quit and not the other way around?
Correct.
And again, another unknown financial institution, PayPal creditor. And then at 17:43 on October 7th, which would now be 5:43 in the afternoon, he calls attorney Todd Taylor. Do you know who Todd Taylor is?
Yes.
Who is Todd Taylor?
Based on his commercials that we all hear, Todd Taylor, Todd Taylor. He's a bankruptcy attorney, among other things.
Just give me a moment because I want to write something down, okay? If I put the easel here, will that block your view?
It blocks the message content, so depending on how
Okay,
much.
so let me just write what I'm going to write, and then I'll move it. So now there is a series of numbers that's 36453. Can you tell the jury what those texts are about?
So that is what is considered a short code. The short code is used by various different companies in order to have a quick way for somebody to get information that you can just text a short code. In this particular case, the short code was 36453. You do see in some of them there is a 1 before the 36453. That was actually something that Penlink did automatically that I can't explain, but based on the analysis and whatnot, I did not find that to be affecting of this information, so it is left in there. But just of note, when I'm talking about the 36453, I'm referring to the one that has the 1 in front as well. That short code is for McDonald's, and it is something for somebody to text if they're interested in job opportunities.
And did he receive a text back from McDonald's?
Yes, he texted apply to that short code at 1748, and immediately he got the automated response of McDonald's is loving your interest in being a part of a great team. Click here to learn more about applying where Lovin lives.
Okay, then we're still on October 7th. We see a call from an unknown financial institution, PayPal creditor, Capital One. And then at 20:06, which would be 8:06 in the evening, he makes a call to Casella Customer Service.
Correct.
And at 8, and at 8:35, he calls East Alabama Reaper.
Correct.
Do you know what East Alabama Reaper is?
It was a car dealership.
You called to confirm that?
That is through open source searches. It is clearly displayed on their Facebook page.
And at some point, then the defendant's phone stops communicating with the cell towers, is that correct?
Correct.
And we heard from Cy that was at 20:42,
Correct.
which would be 8:42.
Correct.
Based on your reviews of the defendant's interviews, did you learn what happened? Did he give a statement to the interviewers about what happened to his cell phone?
Yes.
Okay, and what did he say happened?
He said that on Friday evening, he was getting messages about where to go, and which led him down a road in Essex. That led him into a field. He got out of his truck, and then he was getting messages from Facebook throughout as he was in the field, and Facebook was telling him where to go and what to do as he's going through the field, down a path, ultimately through a culvert to some water, where he destroyed his phone.
So would the destruction of the phone have stopped the cell phone communication?
Yes, as with putting it in Wi-Fi mode or turning it off.
Okay. And so these calls that are coming in after 8:42, can you explain how that's happening?
Yes, so this is, again, what goes through the network. This is independent, really, of what actually makes it to the phone itself. Because even if a phone is off or in Wi-Fi only or airplane mode or whatnot, the phone call that's incoming still talks to Verizon's network. And it just never makes it to the phone itself. So that's where we can see that there's still incoming transactions that are going through the network to get to his phone.
Okay. So the same would be true then for page 40 and 41, where calls are still coming in, but there's nothing going out.
Yes.
Were you also asked to conduct an analysis of the defendant's Facebook communications?
Yes.
And why were you asked to do that?
Again, it was in reference to those interviews. He made several statements in those interviews referencing his activity on Facebook. So I was analyzing his Facebook account that was provided in relation to the statements that he made in his interviews.
And how did you obtain the Facebook information?
A search warrant.
Okay. And do you remember from what date to what date you asked for in that search warrant?
It was from August 1st of 2016 through November 1st of 2016.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 74 for identification and see if you recognize this.
Yes.
What is it, please?
This is the letter of authentication from Facebook that is certifying that the copies of the records that we've received are true and accurate copies of what they had on file at the time that they pulled the search warrant.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will move into evidence Exhibit 74.
Any objection?
No objection, Judge.
74 is submitted without objection.
So tell us, you told us about what you had to do when you got the raw data from the cell phone company, Verizon. What did you have to do when you got information from the Facebook?
So Facebook returns come in two different formats. There's a PDF, which we all understand what a PDF is, but that can, on some accounts, can be up to the tens of thousands of pages. It can be very cumbersome. They also provide individual files that can be opened that are all separate. For the purpose of this analysis, I was predominantly working with the PDF because it's user-friendly, it's more easily read. There is a program called .social that is a tool that is intended to help investigators understand these returns and be able to get through it a little bit better, especially when it comes to the tens of thousands of pages. And I can load the PDF return into it, and it becomes just a pointer system. It does not do any parsing, it does not do any calculations, it doesn't do any translating, it doesn't do anything like that. It just becomes a way for me to look up a certain text message and find out what page in the PDF that text message, or excuse me, that Facebook Messenger message was found on. It's merely a pointer system. But anything that I would have done in there, I confirmed everything in the PDF itself and essentially went through the PDF every page to find the information myself in the return.
And based on your review of the defendant's interviews with different people, did you learn that what he had said about a Facebook message coming from a friend named Chris Whitney?
Yes.
And were you able to find that Facebook message?
Yes.
And what did the defendant tell the interviewers about that contact with Whitney?
So Mr. Bourgoin explained that while he was in this wooded area, this field, this path in Essex, he was getting those messages from Facebook that were telling him where to go. One that he was very specific about was receiving a Facebook message from a childhood friend, Mr. Chris Whitney. He explained that when he got that message, he found it very weird because he had not spoken to Whitney since really grade school. It had been years. And when he got it, he just found that it did not match with his reality when he was looking at Whitney's Facebook page. So he felt that that conversation was actually the government reaching out to him through Chris Whitney, either with a fake page or through Chris Whitney's Facebook page.
I'd like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 78 for identification and ask if you recognize this.
Yes.
And what is it, please?
This is both a copy of the actual Facebook return, a screenshot of the PDF, as well as a converted for time and reader ability.
And is it an accurate representation of the data that you received from Facebook?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the State will move Exhibit 78 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
78 is admitted without objection.
us what we see here on this page.
So this is how it appears in the actual return from Facebook in that PDF. You actually read it from the bottom to the top. The reason that there's that big blue line is this particular messenger message was over 2 pages. So you can see that break in the middle there. But you read it from the bottom to the top. So it starts with Mr. Bourgoin, and then to Chris, and then to Mr. Bourgoin, then to Chris. It is in UTC time, so we have to do the time conversion. That's how Facebook returns.
And this?
So this is with that time conversion, where you can see it. It's in chronological order now, where you can read it from top to bottom. And the furthest left column is going to be that UTC time that we saw on the original return, and then the converted into the local time, and then who authored the message, who sent the message, and then what that message content was.
Okay, so who initiated the contact on October 7th?
Mr. Bourgoin.
Okay, and at what time did he initiate the contact?
It was 8:01 p.m.
Okay, and did Mr. Whitney respond?
Yes,
And what time did he respond?
at 8:09 p.m.
Okay, and did Mr. Bourgoin then respond to him?
Yes,
At what time?
at 8:12 p.m.
And then the last message from Whitney comes in at what time?
At 10:27 p.m.
Based on your testimony about the phone no longer communicating with the cell towers, do you know whether or not the defendant would have ever received that last message?
I do not.
So, as I understand it, according to your review of the defendant's interviews, these were the text messages that caused him to smash his phone and get rid of it?
The Facebook Messenger, yes.
Okay. All right. So did you also conduct any other type of analysis on the defendant's Facebook usage?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that analysis?
I also looked at his searches.
Okay. And what did you do in conducting those searches?
So there's a section of that return, and it breaks down when that account is logged into. So when Mr. Bourgoin's logged into his Facebook account, what searches he actually does within the Facebook application itself. It's independent of like a Google search. This is within Facebook itself. And so I reviewed all of those searches.
Okay. I'd like to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 77 for identification and ask if you recognize it.
Yes.
And what is it, please?
There is a frequency chart that was created based on his search parameters and how many times that was searched, as well as a chronological timeline of when those searches occurred.
State you move Exhibit 77 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
77 is submitted.
Okay, these are the search parameters you were talking about.
Correct.
So are these in order of, descending order of dates?
Yes.
Okay. So on 10/7 at 23, what we're looking, you don't look at the UTC, you look at the local time, right?
Correct.
And at 1944, which is 7:44, what is he searching for?
Cumberland 12.
What is Cumberland 12, you know?
A movie theater?
You know where it is?
Believe it's in Plattsburgh, New York.
And then at 1935, which is 7:35, he searched for all of Mexico 365. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
Okay. How about, he searched at 1812, which would be 612 lead peepers. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
And then at 1752, which is 552, he searched for Now We Are Talking. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
And at 1649, he searched for Get Connected to Find the Right Spouse for Your Kids. Do you know what that is?
I can make an assumption based on the title.
Okay. He's searching for clown threats. Do you know what that is all about?
I believe that's in reference to in 2016, if we remember, there was like incidences of clowns like being outside schools, and there was kind of a nationwide panic about there being clowns around important places, and then it kind of started urban legends of clowns attacking people, and it existed very much in 2016 when this search was conducted.
Okay. And then he also searched for Julian Assange. Do you know what was happening in the fall of 2016?
Yes, at that point in time was when we were going through the election period, and there were WikiLeaks had released Hillary Clinton's emails, and Julian Assange was with WikiLeaks. And at that point in time, right around that same time frame, was when they were saying that they were going to release more of Hillary Clinton's emails from her private server.
Okay. So, just to be clear, Mr. Ray told us that the phone stopped communicating at 8:42 that night.
Yes.
Based on your review of the defendant's interviews, what was he doing Friday night after he'd been driving around?
Could you explain a little bit further what you're asking?
Based on what he told me.
Okay, we're all set. Sustaining the objection. Sustaining the objection, the questions are answered.
Okay. I'd like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 116 for identification. I know if you recognize this.
Yes,
And what is it, please?
they are screenshots from bill copies from Mr. Bourgoin's Verizon account.
I'd like to, Your Honor, I would move this into evidence, 116 into evidence.
It's 116.
No objection.
So 116 is admitted. And what is 116? I'm sorry.
It's a Verizon phone bill,
Okay.
and you received that from Verizon as part of the information they sent you?
Yes,
Okay. Okay, so what is this page? What does that reflect?
so this is the top of the phone bill. This is showing to whom this account belongs. And so you see down in the lower left-hand corner, it says Steve Bourgoin at 103 Madison Drive. And then the upper right-hand corner, you see the account number, and this is the billing period for this particular bill.
And then what is this?
This is a part of the bill that shows his balance due. You'll see that there is a past balance due on the left-hand side, and then what will be due at the end of this billing period.
Okay. Thank you, that's all I have.
Okay, Ross.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, with states, 76. That's the text messages and voice calls from the phone.
Take your word from it from here.
Okay, and Ms. Harden put up on the screen, and we went through 41 pages.
Yes.
Well, did you notice that there were text messages between Mr. Bourgoin and Asima Kosovic about Mr. Bourgoin's daughter?
Yes.
And there were text messages starting on the 1st at 11:03 from Mr. Bourgoin to Ms. Kosovic. Do you remember that?
I would have to look at the actual report to double check those times. Can you say again what you were asking me to look at, please?
On the 1st, at 11:03, is there an outgoing text from Mr. Bourgoin to Asima Kosovic?
Yes.
And based upon your understanding of the investigation of the case, what's the relevance at 11 in the morning on October 1st? What happened with Mr. Bourgoin right before that?
I don't know.
You don't know that he had just had a visit with his daughter?
I know that he had had the visit with his daughter. I didn't know the time frame of it.
And the text messages, well, that was bittersweet. That was the text messages?
Yes.
And there were further text messages between Mr. Bourgoin and Ms. Kosovic about the visit with his daughter, correct?
Yes.
The first later on in the day, Ms. Kosovic texted Mr. Bourgoin at 3:35 and 26. How many times did you break down today?
Correct.
And that he responded, it's like 9 minutes later or so, I was okay, I did what I needed to do for Izzy.
Correct.
And then at 3:44, Ms. Kosovic texted, she's grown.
Correct.
And did you see you right after that?
Correct.
And then Mr. Bourgoin texts back soon after that, space, no aggressive behavior, she was very scared, I don't think it's from me, I hope her mother is not influencing this still.
Correct.
And then at 15:45, Mr. Bourgoin texts Ms. Kosovic, no, she's a little beaner.
Correct.
And then later on, 3:49, Mr. Bourgoin texts, I let her feel in control and presented boundaries to let her feel safe. She seemed like she wanted to do something but was scared to embrace me, like someone was watching. Of course, she has no sense of time, so I'm sure next week doesn't resonate. We'll see how it goes. I will fight through steel for minutes. In the end, she is all that matters.
Correct.
And then Ms. Kosovic texts back at 4:04, it will take time, but she loves you, her dad, love always wins. Correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Bourgoin then texts back soon thereafter, oh, you can tell that she was stunned. Correct?
Correct.
And then another at 4:07 on the first, an outgoing text from Mr. Bourgoin. She took my hand and started taking me for a walk. Tried going into a room, but they had a private birthday, B-day party. There is no intimacy there, which might be hard for her. I have it on the court record as one ting to it for that reason. Plus, Anilla disobeyed judge and was there at drop-off and pick-up.
Correct.
See that? And then later, Ms. Kosovic texts to Mr. Bourgoin, she wasn't supposed to be there. Did you see that at, I'm sorry, at 4:11?
Yes.
And then on seconds, sorry, later on the first, again at 10:39:33. You see that he's texting Ms. DiPaolo. Anilla and I split, though, not good at the time. Back on track, though, with Izzy and life. Not the one for me, I'm sure. Knew that, though. Thanks for supper. Thanks for supporting it when it was part of my life. Great friend. You see that?
Yes.
And then later on, again, to Ms. DiPaolo, at 10:41. I want to start traveling again, and I would like to catch up with you guys if it's between places. You see that?
I'm sorry. The one I'm looking at says just not to be, keep in touch, though I want to start traveling again. Is that the one to
Yes.
which you're referring? Okay.
Yes.
Then yes.
Okay, and then at 22:46 on the first, he texts out to Ms. DiPaolo, Izzy is my life now, she needs me to be a father, everything I want to be to her, oh really, that's great, well you always have a friend in B-Town, and tell anyone from the crew what's up, call me sometime, and we'll make a plan to catch up, it would be great to hear how life has been and what. See that text?
Correct.
that there is a text with Ms. Kosovic on October 2nd in the early morning hours, 57 minutes after midnight, on the 2nd, where Mr. Bourgoin texted Ms. Kosovic, "I think I need to go back to school. I enjoy learning so much." You see that?
Yes.
And then on October 2nd at 1:23 in the morning, 1:23:43, Mr. Bourgoin texts to Ms. Kosovic, "I got to see Izzy today, so I'm charged a bit. It will be nice going into next Saturday." Okay?
Correct.
And based upon your knowledge of the investigation, what was supposed to happen that next Saturday?
Another visitation with his daughter.
And did you notice in your review of the text messages that the kind of the nature and tenor of the text messages kind of changed as you went through the week?
I'm not sure I can qualify a change.
Okay. These are kind of conversational text messages in the beginning, correct?
Sure.
And were they as conversational as we got through the week?
Because the term of conversation is interesting, because for me, when I look at these, a conversation is an actual communication, not necessarily the tone. So there is still communication that's continuing through the week.
The communications, I think you already said this on direct, but the communications that Mr. Bourgoin may have been having through his phone aren't exclusively the text messages that we're seeing here, correct?
I don't know. I'm just saying that it's possible that, it's possible. I do know that there are types of communications that can occur on a mobile device that will not show up as a text message in the Verizon records. It would show up in the data, which is not an itemized type of list the way that these are.
So what are the different ways people can communicate with their phone with others, not through text message?
So the example I used earlier was the iMessage. Another would be Facebook Messenger. Even though that is using the Verizon network in order to actually make that communication happen, it would show up as a data session. There's a lot of different apps out there, chat apps, WhatsApp, Text Now, those type of apps that are communication. They're texting apps, that's what they're intended for, but they do not use the text message service that Verizon provides. They would use the data service.
So there's a bunch.
Correct.
All right. The names that you had in the list, just to be clear, you generated those names. That name that's on there doesn't come with the data from Verizon. There's basically a phone number there, correct?
Correct.
And you did some research and investigation to determine what name to put in that little block.
Correct.
And the PayPal creditor, how did you determine that was PayPal creditor?
I can't remember exactly all of them, how I came about them, but again, I used a bunch of different sources, and it was as validated as we could get it. We looked at a lot of, when I say we, I include like when the Vermont Intelligence Center helped run some of these numbers, and just looking through the cross sources, did it show up as both an open source and in what the Vermont Intelligence Center provided? Or did it show up in open source and I called it, and that seemed to match.
But specifically with PayPal creditor, do you know how you came up with that?
I don't recall specifically.
Did you do any research on who PayPal creditor is?
I just know my knowledge of PayPal, which is that it's a financial institution, it's a bank.
You're not aware that, are you aware that PayPal creditor has been the subject of illegal robocall lawsuits?
No.
There were multiple calls from PayPal creditor, one right after the other throughout these records, correct?
Correct.
So you're not aware that people have sued PayPal creditor to say, keep calling my phone, I don't owe you any money?
I am not.
One moment, you said the tax 10,000. Do you know how you got that identification?
That at least came from open source, Googling it.
And it was 800 number, correct?
I would have to double check.
Okay, look on page 37 at 10/7/16 at 1:04 in the morning.
Yes, it is an 800 number.
And you aware that they advertise on the television and put their number out on the television?
I believe so.
Do you know if they have radio spots as well?
I don't.
And the call, well, this is the one you testified about, you calling them, and they were kind of uncooperative in giving a police officer their identification, correct?
No, that was a different one. That was the unknown financial institution.
Okay, so let's talk about that one. The unknown financial, you identified yourself as a police officer?
I did not.
So you just called and said, who is this on the other end?
The way I would do it when I was calling these numbers is to say, like, hey, I just had this number show up on my phone. Why are you calling me?
And the person wasn't cooperative and wouldn't give you much information?
No, and they were the only company that did not tell me who they were.
The phone call to Todd Taylor, that is on the 7th at 5:43. You remember that one?
Yes.
And based upon your knowledge of the investigation, where is Mr. Bourgoin's cell phone at that time?
I would have to refer back to Mr. Ray's maps to know exactly.
You sat through Mr. Ray's testimony, correct?
I did.
You don't remember this is when Mr. Bourgoin was out and about heading towards McDonald's? I mean, McDonald's text is...
Yes, based on the McDonald's text, because that is shortly thereafter. So he would have been in the area of McDonald's during that phone call.
So he's out in his car.
Correct.
And the jingle, I won't make you sing it again, that comes over the car radio. If that jingle is played on the radio, it might come over a car radio, correct?
Possibly.
Right. And as part of that advertisement, do you remember the phone number as part of that advertisement?
Yes.
Soon thereafter, there's this text to McDonald's, right? Talked about that?
Correct.
Are you aware that if you're at McDonald's or you're in the parking lot at McDonald's, there are signs where this short code number would appear?
That's my understanding.
So Mr. Bourgoin may have been looking at a sign, punching in a number?
Yes.
And Casella, the customer service. Do you remember telling Mr. Ray that it was actually New England Organics?
No.
If Mr. Ray got information about the source of these phone numbers, would that have been provided by you?
Yes.
If we're looking at Mr. Ray's report, maybe refresh your recollection that you identified that number as New England Organics? Hide it?
I guess I don't recognize that name at all, so I would need to look at my report for the information that I gave. There's a list of the numbers that were identified that I would have given Mr. Ray.
So if the name New England Organics appears next to that phone number on Mr. Ray's report, it wouldn't refresh your recollection that maybe that was the name you gave him?
I could look at it and see what he wrote.
Let's give this a shot before we go looking for
Sure.
other documents. Showing you what's been marked as defendant, double L. You have to identify that?
Yes,
What's that?
it's Mr. Ray's report.
If you look down the page there, is that the phone number and the time we're talking about? Or is that the time we're talking about? $806.31.
Yes,
And reviewing what Mr. Ray identified that number as, is that refresh your recollection that you provided him the name New England Organics for that phone number?
I still do not recall identifying that.
There is something that might refresh your recollection that it might be New England Organics?
If that is what I had, it would have been in my report.
Do you have which report is that?
The call detail record report, the really long one.
Do you have that with you?
I don't have it on me now. I have it in the back room.
So you don't know who New England, as you sit here today, you don't know who New England Organics is?
No,
You're not aware that, are you aware at all that New England Organics is an organic compost company?
I don't know.
And are you aware that New England Organics put their 800 number on their spreader trucks out in fields?
Your Honor, I would object. She says she doesn't know anything about this company.
Yeah.
She's made it clear she doesn't know New England Organics while sustaining the objection.
All right. So the another call, next call you talked about with Ms. Harder was this Reaper call. You identified as a car dealership
Correct.
in Alabama.
Correct.
You talked about the Facebook information, and Facebook sends you one thing they send you is a PDF, correct?
Correct.
Even when you have a search warrant and you ask for stuff for Facebook, they don't send you everything, right?
That's not been my experience.
They do send you everything? Or it is your experience that they don't send you everything?
What they give us is what they are telling us is what they have that meets that search warrant.
But for example, they won't send you posts that other people made on Mr. Bourgoin's Facebook page.
They include what is owned by Mr. Bourgoin's account. So for example, if he posts on somebody else's account, we'll see his post, but we might not see the original post because that's owned by somebody else. So we only get to see in that return what is owned on his account.
You explain that much better than my question. Okay. Thank you. The Chris Whitney exchange. Let me just have a moment. You say that was started by Mr. Bourgoin?
Correct.
Do you remember, and that was, I think the information you had is on the exhibit was that on the 7th at 8:01, Mr. Bourgoin says you have lots of hot-looking friends, were you really in the movies, correct?
Correct.
do you remember that there's actually some communication that happened prior to that with regard to Mr. Bourgoin liking a post?
I believe that there was one. I'd have to look at the actual timeline.
So if I show you that marked as defendants, if I showed you a copy of your report, your analysis report from the Facebook, might that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
And showing you what's been marked as defendants and ask you to identify that.
Yes, so your question was?
Was there Facebook activity prior to immediately prior to the Facebook, start of the Facebook chat with Mr. Whitney?
The activity that occurred before that happened at 7:57, and it was a like, where he liked a post from October of 2016.
Okay, so Mr. Bourgoin liked a post a couple of minutes before the start of that chat, correct?
Correct.
And so when did that post come in?
I don't know.
What month did it come in?
According to what Facebook reported, it was a post from October of 2016.
So could it have been a post by Mr. Whitney?
It said that it was content owned by Mr. Bourgoin.
Well, no, the post, right. The content was owned by Mr. Bourgoin, but the post was made to content owned by Mr. Bourgoin. Isn't that what it says?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question. It says that he liked a post from October 2016 to content owned by Stephen Douglas Bourgoin.
So on Facebook, somebody can post on something on your page, correct?
Correct.
So, and the stuff on your page is owned by you, right?
Correct.
So there was somebody in October that posted onto Mr. Bourgoin's page, something on one of his pages, correct?
Possibly.
And Mr. Bourgoin liked that back, correct?
Correct.
And that happened in a couple of minutes before Mr. Bourgoin and Mr. Whitney's chat starts, correct?
Correct.
So it's possible that immediately before the like by Mr. Bourgoin, Mr. Whitney had posted something on Mr. Bourgoin's Facebook page.
Your Honor, I would object to calls for speculation.
Response.
I'm asking if she can answer that question.
If
I don't think
she knows the source of the post.
Well, she doesn't. The question is whether it's possible that happened. I don't think it calls for speculation. She's an expert in the area. She can tell me whether
I'll
it...
take the answer.
I think there needs to be a little bit of explanation before I can answer this. So when it comes to the likes in the Facebook return, the way that it's presented in that return is there's actually like a message ID, and that is that identifier for what is being liked at that time. I worked with other members of my unit in the technology investigation unit to see if we could figure out any way to be able to determine what that message ID correlates with, to be able to know, okay, so when he liked something, what did he like? We weren't able to do that. We exhausted a lot of different avenues to see if there was something that we could do, and we just weren't able to. So the thing that I'm looking at is, when I look at the likes, is, for example, earlier in the day, there was one where he liked the Big Brother Ultimate fan page, but there's no ownership on there. It just says that he liked it. Whereas this one that you're referring to says that the content was owned by Stephen Douglas Bourgoin. So when I'm looking at this, I can't really make a determination exactly what he's liking out of this, or other than it's something on his page, and the fact that it says that it was owned by him, to me, based on that nothing else was saying that it was owned by somebody else, is that it was something of his.
So again, is it possible that Mr. Whitney posted something on Mr. Bourgoin's page, and then Mr. Bourgoin liked it?
Objection, speculation has been asked and answered.
Actually, I said I would take the answer, and the witness's answer wasn't the question, so I'm going to let Mr. Caters ask the question.
It's possible, but I don't have enough information.
Can't say whether that happened or didn't.
I don't have enough information.
The Facebook searches that we had up on the screen, I remember that
Yes.
on the 7th. So how it works is you, on Facebook, there's that little either question mark or...
Mr. Caters, can I, and I hate to do this, but do you know how much more you have? Because I'm assuming Ms. Harden is going to have redirect.
Questions?
I am, I'm almost done, Judge. I really am.
Okay.
Yesterday I went 8 minutes when I said it was really done.
Okay.
The Facebook searches, so how it works is you would type in something to search, and hit search, and Facebook would generate pages based off that search, correct?
Correct.
And then you could kind of lose yourself in Facebook off of that search, correct?
Correct.
So it's not like every time you want to look at something, you'd have to put in another search term.
Depends, because you can't click on things without searching. So when you want to look at something, you could search for it or you could click on it.
So you could put in one search term and then kind of keep clicking on things for about an hour, and that wouldn't show up in the searches, correct?
Correct.
The phone bill, when was the phone bill? It's in the exhibit. I'm going to show you. It's already been dated. States 116. So when is that bill from?
This is the billing period from September 23rd, 2016 to October 22nd of 2016.
And were you aware from your investigation in the case that Mr. Bourgoin had purchased a new cell phone?
Yes.
And you remember how much that was?
Cost?
Yes.
I don't know.
Do you know whether or not the cost of that phone is in that bill?
I would have to look at the bill.
Is that the bill, or is this?
The full bill. These are just screenshots of the full bill.
So as you sit here today, you don't know whether or not the cost of that phone is included in that bill?
I would have to look at the full bill.
I don't have anything else.
Are you familiar with robocalls?
Yes.
And how recent is that it's been happening, the robocalls?
It's been going on for quite some time, but there actually was even just a press conference yesterday with the Senator Peter Welch and Attorney General TJ Donovan that was talking about robocalls.
Were they prevalent back in 2016?
Not as much, and actually according to that press conference, from 2016 to 20...
You're having this witness talk about what she learned from the press conference.
Well, yes.
Okay.
Just to rephrase my question, were the robocalls as frequent back in 2016 as they are today?
No.
Okay. And did you actually see the sign at McDonald's with the text, the number to text if you were interested in getting a job?
Not at the store or at the restaurant.
Thank you.
All set?
All set.
Okay, thank you. You can step back. So another statement on one other witness, but we're going to end it today, but just to summarize what I understand, the plan is that the parties believe, depending on how it goes, that they should be concluding the evidence tomorrow, but it's probably not going to be until the afternoon.
Now.
Okay, so what happens, just so you understand what we have to do, is following the conclusion of the evidence, there's usually what's called a charge conference, where you have to work through all of the issues with respect to the instructions that you will receive. And when you receive the instructions, you're going to see that they're quite lengthy. So our plan is, once the evidence is done, is that we will do that charge conference, which we have to do. You are not here for that charge conference. We're going to let you go when we complete the evidence. So in the ideal world, we would come in first thing Monday morning. We'll be all set with the instructions. The parties will be set with the jury, with the final arguments, that you would get the case Monday morning. That's our plan. We'll see if we can stand to it. So for planning purposes, we just want to. Okay? So your excuse for the rest of the day, again, thank you for patience with the timing issues. And again, I'm going to caution you to please continue to follow the instructions. No research, no news exposure, no conversations with anyone with respect to the case. And we're almost there. So please continue to follow the instructions. And have a great afternoon.
Nice.